Hi, James Gurney here on a little alley in Kingston, New York. I want to paint this alley going back in the late afternoon sun. I'm going to use a brush to block it in quickly, try to build it with shapes, and then go after the lighting in the distance and that parked car that's over on the right. And I have as a priming color that gradient that I put on with a brayer, going from the sky color at the top to the ground color at the bottom. We're using our homemade easels with diffusers to soften the direct sunlight. I'll skip over the line drawing stage and focus instead on placing some of the large dark areas like the far trees and the buildings in shadow. Ooh, it's picking up these layers. And that's because the block printing ink that I used is water soluble, and if it gets wet it picks up, kind of like gouache but even more so. So I have to do this, put down a stroke and leave it. This is the same problem maybe some people have had with gouache, where if you work it at all it picks up previous layers. Well, this is really delicate right now. That's okay as long as I just simply lay down a stroke with a soft brush and leave it. What should I do now, Bob?
What the heck? Don't make mistakes here. We just have happy accidents. Shoot, let's get crazy.
Let's take a question. Go ahead, Peter.
Hi, James. My name is Peter. My question is about perspective. I find that if I focus too much on accurate perspective, I lose the flow of the drawing and it ends up very stiff. So my question is, do you always plot your vanishing points, or is it okay to approximate the perspective?
Well, let me see, Peter. There are other ways to get the perspective without plotting vanishing points. I mean, that's kind of what I'm trying to do now, is to work out the big shapes and the measurements between them. And I find sometimes it's easier to compare shapes rather than lines when you're laying something in. It looks like we have a question from Paul about underpaintings.
When you're doing your prepared underpaintings, do you do an underpainting specifically for a location, or are you doing a bunch of underpaintings and then picking one that meets the scene you're trying to capture on location?
Definitely the second of those two, Paul. I prime a bunch of different pages and then just pick one almost at random when I go out. Hey, let me just take a minute out of this video to tell you about the full-length video that this is an excerpt from. The whole video is called Gradients, and it's part of the Color and Practice series. It's mostly practice and a little bit of theory. I'll take you through 6 different ways of mixing gradients, and so you'll do exercises to follow along with, and then we'll do on-location paintings of the alleyway, landscape with a spot of light in the middle of it, but we'll also do ferns in the woods, and we'll do an outdoor landscape with clouds, all using this idea of color changing from one area to another. This is a great way, packed full of information, but a great way for you to not just watch videos, but also put them to practice and do the practice yourself so you really learn it. So check out Color and Practice, Gradients, and the link is in the description. Now this is getting wet and dripping, and it's also activating that underlayer, so I have to be real delicate with this. I want to get all this dark. Yeah, the problem seems to be that the block printing ink that I used is very water soluble, not meant for this job at all. From now on, when I do the gradient with the brayer, I'm going to make sure to put in a little bit of acrylic matte medium into that priming color so that it will stay down and won't pick up with wet layers later. Let's take another question. Go ahead, Joanna.
Hi, James Gurney. This is Joanna. I have a question regarding the medium that you use. How do you decide whether to use watercolors or gouache or casein for your paintings? Is it the one that you just pick, or how do you decide which one to use?
The most basic choice is between transparent and opaque. If I want to work transparently, like let's say I'm doing line and wash, I'll use watercolor. If I want to work opaquely, I might use gouache or acrylic gouache. The colors I'm using are Viridian, ultramarine blue, titanium white, cadmium yellow light, Naples yellow, Pyrrole, carmine, and light red. I started by using most of the colors transparently, and I'm adding white to make them more opaque. That allows me to cover up the priming color and get a little more vibrancy in my colors. When I did this blue sky to warm ground priming, I was assuming I'd be dealing with a blue sky rather than one that's filled with clouds, which is what I'm dealing with. So I'm going to go ahead and use a warm white over that blue priming to get something that looks sort of white, it's fairly light, but that is really closer to that look of an opaque sky. With almost every priming color, there's going to be a few little places that color shines through, and with semi-opaque passages, you can definitely see it through the top surface. Drew, you had a question about value matching.
The biggest mystery to me right now is how to value match colors between the real world, where they're incredibly vibrant and bright, and then the radically more limited color gamut that's on my page. So things like what to paint the sky, what color to paint the sky, how do I handle the colors on foliage, especially the difference between the light and the dark. And just value matching in general is just this. It's really, I'm finding it extremely challenging.
Drew, number one tip is to get your work up vertically as close as possible to your line of sight, and use a diffuser to make the light levels on the painting about as equal as possible to the scene. You've seen those Instagram shots where people put the painting up in front of the view, and sometimes if the light level is right, the values will actually match as close as possible. And here I've got it pretty close. Of course, as you suggest, the values are going to be greater in a scene between the brightest bright highlights and the darkest dark. And when the light changes, as it's doing now to overcast, you lose the contrast of the shadows. So you have to pick one light environment that you're looking at and try to match to that. The key is grouping values. Don't overstate variations within a given area, and try to see all the shadows as related values. Trevor from Arlington, Washington. Go ahead, please.
Do you get permission from people before sketching them, or before sketching places they own? Thanks.
Well, the general rule of thumb is that if you're in a public place, a public street, you're okay to look in any direction and paint anyone unless they have a reasonable expectation of privacy. So if it's a street like this where you have a variety of houses and domestic and commercial spaces, actually we're near a restaurant, we're fine. I think as artists we all feel conspicuous when we set up to paint somewhere, but keep in mind that most people are pleased that you're interested in where they live or their area. And if they're curious, give them permission to come take a look. If they seem really annoyed, then I suppose common courtesy comes into play and you can ask them permission or apologize, but usually you're okay to sketch in public. And most times people just tune you out and you become almost invisible on the street where you're painting like this. Since we've been here, people have gotten takeaway food, the tow truck has come and gone, And there've been a few drug deals happening, I think. And so it keeps changing from moment to moment. I'm working my way around the composition, trying to get various details to work together. The brightness of the sky, the details of the fences and the rooftops, and then working my way forward toward the foreground. I want to get some transparency and a sense of gradient to that shadow area in the foreground. So maybe if I scumble a little bit of lighter tone over that, I can get some more natural variation. And make it a little bit lighter and cooler toward the edge, kind of a subtle gradient as it comes up to the edge. All in all, this has taken about 2 hours of time, with everything changing, cars coming and going, and a lot of elements that are not the same as they were when I started out.
What the heck? Shoot, let's get crazy.